the drive. Tatum the finish. It is Banner 18. The mission commanded is mission accomplished.
What's up, everyone? This is Noa Dalzell, and I'm here with another episode of You Got Boston live here. I haven't gone live in a couple of weeks, so I figured why not go live and do kind of more of an NBA media episode today, which actually came out because I saw some tweets that said, that we need to talk more about media literacy, and I was thinking about how much I've learned over the past 2 years of covering the Celtics and doing this full time and just being around the NBA media landscape from a very different perspective than I was a few years ago. So basically just thought about it and thought about how it would be cool to do an episode where I can answer questions and I can talk about how I got into this field, what I've learned about the NBA media landscape, and how to kind of navigate, especially right now. There's so many rumors out there. There's so much like misinformation or people aggregating things and different journalistic practices, things that I just didn't really understand at the beginning, and I understand more now. And I've made plenty of mistakes too, so I'm not going to act like I'm the expert or like my opinion is the only opinion on these things, but just figured I would do a kind of informal episode. And honestly, part of my thinking was this is a slow news time. There's not going to be any news for a while. And then Jaylen Brown had knee surgery today, so it ended up being not that slow. And I'm not surprised that happened. I talked to him a couple weeks ago about how he was considering it and he wanted to get multiple opinions. And he was talking to different doctors and weighing kind of the pros and cons of surgery versus no surgery. But I didn't think it was going to happen today. So today the Celtics announced that he underwent surgery. He posted a few photos from the hospital with his grandfather, who was just at his event this past weekend. So there is some Celtics news. So if there's burning questions related to that, I'm happy to chat about it. But I figured in the meantime, I could do kind of a more informal NBA media style episode as well. And we're actually going to do a garden report on CLNS media tonight after game three, yes, discussing Jaylen Brown's knee and everything that is associated with that and that injury. So if you have questions, if you want to kind of hear more about that, we will be going live right after game 3, doing a reaction garden report show. And so we can dive into all of that later as well. And as always, you can find everything on CLNS Media, all of the sound from players. If there are any interviews, they'll be on there. We got a bunch of podcasts. My podcast, We Got Boston podcast, is on there. The Garden Report, the Big 3 podcast with Rod Blakely and Gary Washburn. So a lot of good content you can find throughout the offseason. We had Baylor Shireman on the show last week on the Garden Report, so you can find that as well. So check out CLNS Media. We're actually cranking out even more content in the offseason than we were cranking out during the season, it feels like. So it's definitely no decline. And part of it is just this has just been this is going to be an interesting offseason regardless. So if you have any questions in particular, I can use these to guide, but I actually have questions that people submitted on Twitter earlier. So apologies if it looks like I'm on my phone. I am on my phone. I'm just scared to open another tab because when I open another tab, my streaming platform normally crashes. But I guess to start, I'm going to just share kind of how I got into covering the NBA and how I got into this field to begin with, and then I'll go from there. So I studied political science in college. I was an environmental lobbyist out of school, worked in that field for the past 3 years, actually really liked it. So it wasn't like I was so miserable, but I was kind of bored of working remotely, and I really loved watching basketball and loved watching the Celtics. And I was I spend so much time watching the Celtics play and talking about it with my friends and talking about it with my dad and my family. And I was okay, I need to be somewhat productive. So one day I was on Celtics blog and I saw that there was actually a listing that said we're hiring a couple of writers this summer. And I was thinking to myself, oh, that's a very ideal timing. And I didn't know actually that this only happens once a year. So my timing was actually kind of wild that I saw that. I had just had that thought that week that it'd be fun to blog. So I applied, spent a lot of time on my application. I edited it for hours because I was okay, this is a great opportunity. Did it all in the car on the way back from a hike. So it was not the most ideal circumstances, but I wanted to get it done, submitted it, got the job. When I first got the job, I thought it was an actual job. Then I realized it's basically unpaid and it was just an opportunity to write about the team. And I was okay, I'll do it. And then once I got that opportunity, I was blogging a little bit and I was saying to myself, wouldn't it be so cool to go one day to a game and have a press pass? because I, for some reason, like just being a huge NBA nerd, I would listen to all the press conferences after games. So, like the morning after games, I would literally put them in like a podcast, and I would listen to everything that every single player had to say on both sides of a game that I watched. And so I was like, wouldn't it be so cool to like be in that room? And so I reached out to my boss, and my boss was like, actually, like, well, we can potentially credential a Celtics blog reporter. And so that's kind of like, and I won't get too in the weeds because it's not that interesting, but basically once I got credentials, I was able to be in the space where all the other reporters were. And it was like just this mind-boggling thing for me because I had the opportunity to like meet all the reporters that I listened to their podcast and see the players up and close. And it was like, oh my God, I can't believe that because I applied to this like basically unpaid blogging position, now I'm in this position. But once you're in that room, once you have credentials, the world's kind of your oyster because now you have access, you can ask questions, you can write, you can meet other reporters. That was a huge thing for me. How I got on CLNS is meeting Bobby Manning and meeting other people and working for CLNS and getting involved there. So it's kind of a ripple effect. And so for me, it started because I literally just saw the job listing. I didn't study journalism in college. I did do a lot of journalism in high school and actually had a Celtics website when I was a kid. But I had studied journalism and I didn't have like a formal journalism background. I didn't have like a bunch of internships at different newspapers. So I didn't necessarily think that was a realistic pathway. And I wouldn't necessarily say that's the way you should do it, but it worked out. I think a lot of like coincidences and things that I got lucky too. And I will say like being a lobbyist, there's a lot of talking, a lot of writing. And so for me, it wasn't that different to shift to this. Like it was a lot of the same skill set. So that made it a little bit easier as well. So I had a lot of preconceived notions about how the media worked. And I figured like you're asking questions and you're writing articles about it. And like, that's kind of it. And I didn't really know what to expect. And I think I learned a lot in year one. Year one, I was still doing this part-time, pretty much unpaid. I paid for all my own travel. I paid for every single thing going to the playoffs. I was like, I want to do this. I really want to do this really badly, but I had a 9-to-5 job. So when I was covering the Dallas Mavericks finals, I was getting up at 4 a.m. and writing, doing all my work so I could come to shoot around and then like report from shoot around and do my stand-ups and everything. But I was still full-time, not covering basketball. So that first year was kind of crazy. And then about a year ago, I actually switched to doing this full-time, which enabled me to do it a lot better. So that's a little bit of how I got into this field. As I mentioned, like I grew up a huge Celtics fan. I used to go to TD Garden all the time and think this is the greatest place on earth. And so I was like, one day it'd be so cool to have like a partial season ticket pass and I could go to like a few games or something like that. So that was how I kind of got into this space. And I played basketball my whole life. I played basketball in high school. I played club basketball at Northeastern, where I went to school for 6 years because I did my master's degree there as well. So it was always, for me, the love of my life, my biggest passion. I will never get sick of basketball. Playing basketball, I still play all the time, a couple times a week. Go shooting by myself. I'll go play in a pickup league where I'm not even good, but I love it so much. So that's kind of how I got involved. So I'm going to start scrolling through if there are any questions. Tom here asks, what do you find most useful? On the record quotes where players are guarded, but you can use it in your writing versus off the record conversations that help you know exactly what's going on. So this is actually a great question, and I'll talk about it for a few minutes because I think there's not a simple answer here. When I started, I thought to myself, okay, so what is reporting when it comes to the NBA? It's asking questions in press conferences and then transcribing those and then putting those in my story. And that was, I would say 95% of what I did in my first 2 years has been that. When I started traveling, and I started traveling this past season and was able to get access to the locker room, which not all the reporters do, probably a little less than half, or actually like a fraction of the reporters that cover the team actually are able to go in the locker room before and after games. That was a huge turning point for me because it enabled me, one, to like be able to make small talk with the players and like actually have a little bit of a relationship with some of the players. And then also there are just way fewer reporters. So if you're on the road covering like a random Celtics Hornets game, there's like 4 reporters there. So you can actually ask a bunch of questions and you can chat more off the record. So that was like a big thing for me, is being able to be on the road and being able to travel and have that access. And only in the middle of this year, I actually got locker room access. So my first year and a half on the beat, I did not have locker room access. And it was like something that I like was a little bit embarrassing because I was like, I'm on the road and like there's a press conference and I can't go in the locker room and there's like 2 other reporters here and they can. And so I'm just sitting here like kind of feeling useless. Like why did I make this trip? But it was part of the process of being able to kind of get that credibility. And I don't work for, a huge outlet. Celtics blog is like a more informal site, but I kind of wanted to get to that point where I had that access. So basically to be long-winded here, but I basically found that the on the record stuff is really useful as far as you're writing your stories and what you can actually report, but it's the off the record things that make you know you're heading in the right direction. So you might know, okay, I've talked to a couple of people, this is what they're telling me. That's off the record. I can't report anything they say. I can't say sources say this because they told me not to report this, but they are steering me in the right direction. So I wanted to chat a little bit about this because I see a lot of the stuff with the rumors and the NBA trade rumors and all of that. So right now, most reporters can't report what they know. Like if you are like one of the long-standing beat writers in covering the Houston Rockets, you probably have heard things from conversations with front office executives, with players, with agents that are helping inform your takes, but you don't really know exactly when you can report something or what exactly is going to happen, but you have a much better sense than you can put in a story. If I could say every single thing that I've heard off the record and put it in a story, it'd be a fun story for you guys all to read. It'd be great. I wish I could. And this is something that I'm still navigating, is like, how do you leverage things but then also not break any of your sources' trust? Like it's something that I'm learning, and I'm asking kind of older reporters that have been doing this longer. But I will say, what you can do as a fan and somebody that's consuming a lot of media is think, okay, if this reporter has never really gotten anything wrong and I trust them, if they're saying something like, okay, it's pretty likely that these players are going to get traded, or like this is something to think about, or think about this aspect of things, they're probably saying it because they've heard somebody else say it and it's actually like a source thought. So for example, for me, I'm not going to say anything that I don't have some reason to believe is true. It doesn't mean that it's like on the record. It doesn't mean that anybody told me report this, but you're trying to be as informed as possible. And for me, especially because I do a lot of writing and I do a lot of talking, when I talk, I want to make sure that the stuff I'm saying is substantiated. And so I guess in a long-winded way to say, on the record helps me write stories. Off the record helps me know which stories to write, and which direction to go in. It's always exciting when you get something good on the record, something substantive. Like a couple weeks ago when I was at one of Jaylen Brown's 741 pop-up events, on the record, he told me, I'm considering surgery. I'm talking to multiple doctors and I'm weighing the pros and cons. And that was the first time that he had ever said that, to a reporter. It had been reported, but it was the first time he said that. So that was like a useful information for me. I didn't have to think about how do I navigate this because I could just put that in my story because he said it on the record. If you say something off the record, then you want to make sure the number one priority is that you don't break your source's trust. So if Jaylen says something off the record to me, the number one priority is making sure that if I want to report something that I got permission to do so, because otherwise nobody's going to talk to you again. So that's kind of the fine line in the NBA media landscape, is that people know more than they can report. And it's kind of frustrating and it's kind of weird to think about how do you navigate that. And again, you still only know a sliver. Like I think the teams themselves usually don't even know exactly what's going to happen. Like right now, most teams don't know exactly what moves they're going to make. They're still exploring things. They don't know what kind of offers they're going to get. But when you see things that are definitive, like this player is for sure not going to get traded, there's a 0% chance, or this player is for sure not retiring, a lot of times those are not true reports, because there's a lot of things that are, the reporters that are sitting at home being like, I actually know that to be not true, but it's easier to put stuff out there if you don't have to worry about your sources, basically. So I didn't really know to expect that. And I don't know if maybe that's a little bit confusing, but that's just to give a little bit of context, kind of how I've navigated things. Question here from an aspiring journalist from Alex. Just wrapped up my freshman year of college. I do a lot of sharing of articles on X. Wondering if you have any advice for growing engagement on X posts in general around articles. So engagement on Twitter is a great topic. And honestly, I have some regrets around how I approached Twitter in my first year, but also I was trying to grow my audience and like you're trying to figure out everything. So I give myself a little bit of grace. But I think the biggest thing that I would say is you want to be consistently posting. If you're trying to grow a following, you don't want to just like post during games and then not post for 3 days because fans are trying to figure out, like, okay, I'm a diehard Celtics fan. When I open Twitter, I want to be able to go to my audience and I want to be able to say, okay, if I go to this reporter, everything they say is going to be, up to date. So my thinking was I want to be posting all the time. After every game, I want to find the most interesting things that were said, post those, all of that. And so if you're trying to establish yourself as an authority on something, like, you want to have a niche thing. For me, I've struggled because I cover the WNBA and the Celtics. And so sometimes I know fans go to me for Celtics things, but when I just randomly post with the WNBA, like, that's not really who my audience is as far as my Twitter followers go. So if you're an aspiring reporter, figure out, like, what is the thing that I want to be the authority on? Like, do I cover my college football team? Do I cover a professional sports team? Like, even if you don't have access yet, you can still be posting about it and writing about it and giving your thoughts. But people will follow you for a specific reason. They're not following you because you're an influencer, right? Like Twitter, the Twitter media space, like, nobody cares about me as a person. They care about what I have to say about the Celtics. And so that's one thing. The other thing is, like, you don't want to put links in your initial tweets. That whole idea of, like, links being suppressed is a real thing. Like, Twitter suppresses links. So I always put a photo in the initial tweet and then a link in the reply. And then you always want to think about what's the most interesting thing in my story. So I write a lot of articles and a lot of them are 2,000 words. And I actually get a decent amount of my views coming from Twitter. And so when I write those stories, I think, what is the number one most interesting thing in the story? That has to be in the initial tweet, because that's what's going to be what people are retweeting, what they're quote tweeting, what they're replying to. And hopefully they take the time to actually read the story. They don't always do that. So I want to make sure that if they don't read the story, the quote is not misleading. And that's where I get frustrated sometimes, because when things get aggregated, you might take a quote that's out of context and put it in the NBA Central that takes a quote from my story and, like, it's not well contexted, and that always frustrates me. But with my stories, I can make sure, okay, the most interesting thing that was said was this quote. I'm going to put it here, and then I'm going to hope that people read the actual story. And most people don't read the actual story. I'll get an article that the tweet has 50,000 views, but only 1,000 people actually clicked on it from the tweet. So that's just a part of it. But I would say consistency, accuracy. You want to be known for being accurate. Like, my goal is to never make any mistakes, and I probably will make a mistake at some point, but you don't want to get anything wrong. And if I think something is probably true, I'm going to double check like 10 times before I actually say it. And if I have a report, but I'm not 100% confirmed, or I need another confirmation, you're always better safe than sorry. So that's something else that I've learned. I know the reporters that I trust are the ones that are never wrong. And that's why I go to those reports. Those are the only ones that I really pay attention to. Most reporters I don't really pay attention to as far as rumors and things like that go, because I know they've been wrong. And so they're speculating. Okay. That's a great question, though. Another question here from Tom. Did you ever feel starstruck shortly after getting your press credentials? I'd be so nervous in an environment like that. Another great question. I think the thing that I was the most starstruck by was not any individual person, but it was actually the place. Like, growing up, I was completely infatuated with TD Garden. I thought it was the greatest place on earth. I thought to myself, I've never been happier than I am in this building. And when I was in there and I was able to walk by the court, I was like, I am so starstruck by TD Garden. I don't know what it is, and I'm sure some people relate to this. I've never been, like, particularly starstruck by celebrities. Like, I was a huge Taylor Swift fan growing up. I'm sure that doesn't, like, shock people, but I was a huge Taylor Swift fan growing up, and I never wanted to meet her. Like, that just wasn't an instinct that I had. I actually thought, like, meeting her might be a little awkward because, like, I like her music, but, like, I don't know that we're going to have anything to talk about. So it actually helped me when I started covering the team that I wasn't starstruck by the athletes. Like, that wasn't really like a curve that I had to undergo. And I'm sure for some people it is, and then you just get through it, and next thing you know, you realize they're just real people. But I was nervous to, like, not do anything wrong, and I was nervous just being like, okay, now all of a sudden I'm asking questions that can be on television. Like, that was weird for me. But I was a lobbyist, so I would talk to politicians and I would testify at hearings. So, like, that, a lot of it was kind of familiar. But I think it is kind of a weird thing, because one day you're watching all these guys on television and you have your own takes, and then the next day you're asking them questions. And for me, it was pretty quick, that adjustment to being like, okay, they're just literally normal people who are really good at basketball. And I'm also a person who loves basketball and played, and I just wasn't as good as them. And so that's the difference between us. And sure, like, they have security around them, and they have, like, some, you can't just go up to them all the time. So there are barriers. But pretty quickly I felt like, okay, these are just normal athletes. And some people you develop a relationship with, some people it just stays like very much like, oh, there's a wall between you. You just ask the questions. But either way, I think that kind of went aside pretty quickly. And appreciate the nice comments here. Question here from Adam. With all the different reports about the Celtics this offseason, where do you feel your responsibility as someone who reports on the team is to help fans navigate this uncertain time? That's a great question, because I kind of, the impetus for this podcast was actually that. It was this feeling of like, I feel like there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I want to try to combat that a little bit, but I'm also really not in the business of calling people out on Twitter. So I probably did it when I started, which was like 2 years ago. So I was like an adult, so I take responsibility. But I think when I got on Twitter, and I'd never been on Twitter before I started covering the Celtics, so I was completely new to the platform. I would always, if I saw something, I would just quote tweet it and like dunk on it, which I know a lot of people do. And one, just like having a following, you have to be more careful about that, because there's just immediately more eyes on whatever you're saying than it would be if I was just like when I first started, when I had 50 Twitter followers. But I also just don't view the public shaming thing to be very effective. So I'll give an example. I interviewed Jaylen Brown a couple weeks ago. I wrote a story that I was proud of that talked about a lot of different things related to him and his knee and the shoe line and the community. And it was a broad interview. He gave me like 15 minutes of his time. And a lot of it got aggregated in a way that wasn't accurate. For example, there was a story written about how Jaylen Brown like slammed Kobe Bryant and his legacy, because one of the quotes in the story was about Jaylen explaining to me that one of the things that makes his shoe different is that he wears the exact same shoe as the fans wear. So like, I have a pair of Jaylen's shoes. They're the exact same pair that Jaylen wears. You could criticize that. You could say he should have a better pair than what the fans wear. That's valid. You could say it doesn't really matter if the player wears the same one. But he just gave me an example of Kobe, because Kobe's obviously so heralded for his shoe line, and said, like the example is, Kobe's shoes would be different than what he was wearing. And I know that Jaylen loves Kobe Bryant, and the way he said it was really just explaining it to me, because I didn't know that. And he could tell that I was surprised when he explained the way that shoe situation works. That got taken out of context, and a story basically like was like a hit piece, I thought, written about Jaylen and Kobe. And rather than quote tweeting it and being like, what's wrong with journalism, I just messaged the reporter that wrote that. And there was a couple of different stories like that. So I'm not trying to call anybody out. Like, just in general, that's just an example. So I try to message people directly if I see stuff, rather than try to like create a public discourse on Twitter. Because it always feels to me that unnecessarily dramatic. And the way that Twitter is, just people just pile on to things, and that's never really my intention. So that's something that I've tried to do, is just privately message people if I see that they reported something that I know is incorrect, and be like, are you sure about this? Because I've heard exactly the opposite, rather than going public with it. But I will say, like, right now, if you're trying to sift through all the news and you're trying to figure out like what exactly is accurate and what's not, the biggest thing I would say is anybody that is like making a promise is probably wrong right now. If you hear somebody say, this player is for sure on the team next year, this player is for sure not on the team next year, Al Horford is 100% coming back, Al Horford is 100% retiring, that is probably inaccurate. And I'm not going to say like 100%, because maybe somebody has a source that can confirm that. But generally speaking, that's a good rule of thumb, because right now this is a period of a lot of uncertainty. And all of my conversations have led me to believe that even the Celtics don't know exactly about most of these things. And so I would just say, like, figure out who are the reporters that you trust, and whether that's your local reporters, whether that's national reporters, figure out who those are, and really just listen to those people. Because if you try to just like follow every single report, a lot of these big aggregation sites will just aggregate some random account. And I go back and I look at the original source, and I'm like, this is not a credible report. But if you're just scrolling and you see NBA Central or Legion Hoops aggregate somebody, don't just assume that's true, because it might not be true. And if there's, honestly, like I say this a lot, my DMs are open. If you're ever curious about something, like I actually will be happy to answer. And I'm more happy to chat there than like go back and forth and fight with people on Twitter, because I just don't enjoy that. So yeah, hopefully that's somewhat helpful. I'm going to do one more question, and then question here from Fritz. What are some of the things you learned from your college degree that you implement into your journalism? Great question, because I did do a lot of communication in political science. If you don't know what a lobbyist is somebody who tries to convince legislators to believe what they believe. And for example, like I worked on bills about the environment, so I explained like, here's why this matters, here's why you should care about it, and try to speak their language. I think the biggest thing that I learned is how to read the room. So, for example, there are games where right after a loss, Joe Mazzulla sits at the podium, and it is incredibly obvious that he is not going to talk today. And you still need to write your story, but this is not the day to ask him that fun question that he is trying to navigate dealing with like a loss. Like today is not the day to ask him about like some random player that I'm curious about that I'm writing a feature. It doesn't mean that I always get it right. There's a few questions I would definitely take back. But I learned, this resonates with this person, like the same way with one politician, you can talk this way. With another politician, you don't ask that kind of question because it doesn't resonate. That's kind of how I view the players. Like at the end of the day, it's just about reading people and having an understanding of what makes them tick. And so certain days I may not ask a player a hard question. Another day I might. Certain players, I might ask a certain kind of question. And it really reminds me of lobbying and talking to politicians, and it's just with players. Because at the end of the day, like being a good lobbyist is actually appealing to the emotions of politicians. And so for people who know anything about that world, that may make sense. Maybe for other people, that was more confusing than it was worth. But I did a lot of talking, a lot of writing, and a lot of trying to get people to reason with me and to be open-minded with me. And I still do all of those things now. It's just about a much more fun, lighthearted topic, because ultimately basketball is very lighthearted. And that's what I always remind myself, that this is all for fun and that it is not, it's not supposed to be heavy. It's not supposed to be hard. It's not supposed to be, they're just people. We're just talking about sports. Like it should, unless you're talking about something really heavy, which once in a while there is a heavy topic, but 99.9% of the time we're talking about basketball. Question here from Bobby. Shout out Bobby for participating in the live stream. What's your favorite interview you've done? What would be your dream interview? I think my favorite interviews were definitely all this year. Usually when you're doing an interview through the Celtics PR, like at practice or a shoot around, you have a 5-minute cap, which is kind of hard to establish a lot of like comfort with the player, make small talk, like joke around. Next thing you know, like your 5 minutes are up. So I think the interviews that I've done in more informal settings, like when I was at the 741 pop-up a few weeks ago, I had like 15 minutes with Jaylen Brown. That was a really good interview, and I felt like it was very laid back. It wasn't at practice. It wasn't at shoot around. There weren't a bunch of people there. So those help. I had an interview with Peyton Pritchard at a shoot around earlier this season where we talked about a lot of different things about like why he doesn't flop, about why he practices floaters even though he never takes them in games, like a bunch of random topics. You can find that story on Celtics blog. Both of those stories are on Celtics blog. But it's usually when I have those are two players that like I know a ton about. I've interviewed them both a bunch of times. So the right questions to ask, the buttons to hit. Like Pritchard, for example, he's always really willing to explain basketball to me. If I ask a question that's like I'm genuinely curious, obviously he knows way more about basketball than I do, even though I pride myself in knowing a lot about basketball. So if I have a question that's like, can you explain why you did this or like why you did this? That really helps him. Like that really gets him going. Jaylen, I feel like when I ask him about his feelings or about how he processes things or about his emotions or things like that usually resonates. So like both of those guys, I think I've had really good interviews with this year. My dream interview would be to have like an hour with somebody. Because I always think about like when you're talking to somebody across dinner, like how much farther you can go than just 10 minutes. So I don't really care who, like anybody on the team to have like a really extended period of time, just one-on-one. I think that would be awesome. But honestly, I had like some great interviews that meant a lot to me this year that I was thoroughly grateful for the opportunity to even have that chance. And just a quick message from our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to turn your sports knowledge into cash. With millions of members, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You can pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. Cash in on the basketball playoffs with Prize Picks. Don't miss your last chance to add your favorite players from the core to your Prize Picks lineup. Whether it's points, rebounds, assists, take your pick of more or less for your shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash today. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive their $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. The basketball playoffs are here and the action is heating up on Prize Picks, the best place to cash in on your favorite sports. This week on Prize Picks, I'm looking at the basketball board and I'm optimistic about the Pacers. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. And on Prize Picks, you can get a free Jaylen Williams square. He just needs 0.5 points. Okay, going back to some questions here. How do you navigate sexist language? Do you ignore it, scream it into your pillow later? Keep up the great work. Well, first of all, thank you. There is definitely some sexism in NBA media, but I also think I've been actually pleasantly surprised with how many people don't really care about your gender, like how many people are willing to listen to me talk about the Celtics, even though I'm not a guy. So overall, it's actually been a very pleasant experience. Once in a while, if I get like a funny sexist comment that is just like so stupid that it's ironic, I will have to quote tweet that because it's just like, I'm like, I need other people to see that ridiculous thing that I just saw. But generally speaking, the key is to just ignore things. And one of the things that I learned from the beginning is ignore everything online, which kind of sucks because sometimes I'm like, I want to address this, like there's a misinformation or there's a misunderstanding. But if people message me directly, I will always respond. But if people put stuff out on the internet, like you're just not that's kind of the rule. And I don't really know why. Sometimes I'm like, I want to respond to this. This is not true, or I didn't actually say this or whatever. But you're not really supposed to go back and forth because you're just kind of feeding into what people want, which is like an inflammatory discourse online. So it hasn't really been a major issue though. And I feel like the players respect me, the players take me seriously, the coaches do, the people in the organization, the fans for the most part. So like I can live with a little bit of that. Obviously, I wish it wasn't part of the landscape. And sometimes I do get it worse than other times. Some days I'm like, why is everybody so sexist today? Like, I don't know why, but generally speaking, I've actually been very positively surprised. And I come from a very male-dominated field. Like when I was lobbying, I was the only woman in the room most of the time. So I'm pretty comfortable in that space. Like I am, outside of Abby Chin, our sideline reporter, I am the only woman on our beat. But like I don't usually notice it or think about it too much or mind. Okay, continuing to look here. Oh, this might be my roommate Ariel. I'm assuming this is a mutual friend. Thanks for joining. Tom here asks, how do you keep yourself grounded in the roller coaster of NBA media? Part of what makes your coverage so great, thank you, is that it's grounded and recognizes nuance, but hot takes, unfortunately, trend more often. So part of the thing for me is that I don't have like imposter syndrome. I have like, I want to always be the expert when I'm talking about something. So for those of you that listen to the draft episodes, I am not a draft expert. I've said that like 30 times, but I really wanted to bring in experts to talk about it so that when you guys are listening to me talk about something, when I do say like, okay, guys, like I actually know about this, or I have a really strong feeling about this, like I have credibility. So my thing is that I'm only going to give hot takes if I really, really, truly believe them. I have a really hot take about next season. I haven't said it yet, and I'm going to wait on it for a second, but I have a really hot take. And I've been thinking about it for like days before I'm going to put it out there because I want people that follow me to know that if I do put something out there, it's because I truly believe it. And it's not because I'm trying to get clicks. I found that you can get clicks not doing that stuff. So if I write like a story that tells you a new thing about a player, like when I did my mom series, like those were really well received. I interviewed the moms of 5 players on the Celtics. And people loved those stories and they got a ton of views. And so it kind of taught me like you can do things the way you want to do them and there's an audience for it. I fall for the hot takes thing. Sometimes I see stuff that Stephen A. Smith or ESPN people are talking about, and I'm like, okay, I know I shouldn't respond. I shouldn't quote tweet this. Like you feed off of engagement, and I can't help myself once in a while. So I get why people do it, but I try my best to not feed into the hot takes discourse too much. One of the things that's tough though is that like sometimes you have to discuss like the topic of the day, like talking about trading Jaylen Brown. I don't enjoy talking about like trading players because at the end of the day, whatever happens, but I don't want to spend like a whole month being like, this guy should be traded, this guy shouldn't be traded. But it is part of the job. So like there's parts that I like less. I think the trade rumor stuff I like the least. I don't want to speculate on who's going to get traded. It's not fun for me. I like writing stories about basketball. I like writing stories about what these players are like off the floor. I love the philanthropy stuff. I love going to the community events. But it's part of the job. And it's like, it's part of, fans are wondering what's going to happen and you have to give your perspective. So sometimes you have to do it. But I think that my goal is always to not have that be what drives me. And I think you can actually get clicks and get views doing other things. And I wouldn't have necessarily known that, but I've been doing that over the last year and a half and there's been an audience, and I don't have the biggest audience in the world for sure. But I have enough of an audience where I would not stray from the way that I'm doing things right now. And I will also say one of the things that I've learned is like, I have access to my page views, my YouTube views, my podcast views. A lot of times you don't have to say something inflammatory, but there are little tricks to get more views that I've learned. Like, for example, and this is kind of stupid and I wish this wasn't the case, but when there is an injury update, if I'm writing a story about like what is the latest related to Jason Tatum's injury, instead of making the headline, Jason Tatum will miss 3 weeks with wrist injury, I make it Celtics announce to Jason Tatum recovery timeline. So that way you have to click to read my story. And I feel kind of like, I don't love doing that. It feels kind of sleazy to like make people click, but that's like protocol and nobody's harmed in that. It doesn't mislead anybody. I still give you the information you're looking for. I'm not clickbaiting anything about Tatum. So there are certain things you have to just accept are part of the game. And that's one, like how it's called a curiosity gap headline. You might see it on Google. When you Google something, like the headline makes you want to click because you don't know the answer. So if a player is waived, I might say like Ace's player is waived instead of the name of the player. And that's just like how Google works right now. And it kind of sucks. And I wish you could just use like the classic newspaper headline, but that's just something else that I've learned like really, really helps. So I might say Baylor Shireman discusses like why XYZ, or, how he dealt with minute struggle, instead of giving you the answer in the headline and then you don't have to click. So that's like one of the tactics you use. Am I taller than Jimmy? I don't know exactly how tall Jimmy is, but I'm 5'10". So yes, I'm taller. Let's see what else. Have I met Jackie McMullan? I've actually never had like an extensive conversation with her, and that's on me. I'm like, one of the things I got to get better at is actually going up to people and like introducing myself. I feel like there are so many times where it just kind of happens naturally, but she's someone I've only met a couple times. So I'm putting it out. Now that I'm saying it out here publicly, next time I see her, I'm going to have to go up to her and talk to her more extensively. Brendan asks, have you ever had that I made it moment in reporting? And if so, what was it? I've had a bunch. I feel like I have one all the time. One of the big ones for me was being on, when it was the women's broadcast for the Celtics, I was on NBC Sports Boston's postgame show for like 20 minutes. And it was just like being on TV was like a crazy feeling because I've grown up watching NBC Boston's postgame show. So I didn't have TV aspirations. It's not necessarily like my thing, but that was like a cool moment. Honestly, I think when I was at like all the playoff games and I was like, I can't believe I'm actually at the finals for free and getting paid for it rather than paying to be at the finals. Like those were cool moments as well. Another one is honestly, like whenever I have a good conversation with a player or I get off the record information, I'm always like, damn, like that's pretty cool that somebody's telling me something because they trust me and because they know I'm not going to like go try to make it a inflammatory thing. And then I think to myself, like 2 years ago, I didn't even know this was a possible career. So I think about that stuff all the time. And I hope that I never take any of the sports media stuff for granted because I truly don't, it doesn't feel like a real job. It feels like literally just fun all the time. And I'm sure one day it will feel like a job, but not right now. Okay, continuing to look through some of these. Oh yeah, somebody here said that they found me through the Dunked On podcast with a preview of the season. So I actually have had a lot of people say that. I didn't realize it, sometimes you go on a podcast or you write a story, like the entry point to people finding your reporting can be a lot of different things. You're a guest on something or you have a take that people see, but usually it's like you appeared on a podcast or you wrote a story that came across people's feed. And I write a lot. Like writing is still the number one thing that I do. So that's usually the entry point to how people find my reporting. And then I always want to bring them to my podcast because I love podcasting and I love that I have a platform to do this. Someone here asked, do I make my own thumbnails? I do not make my own thumbnails. Probably my biggest weakness as a reporter or somebody in this field is that I am so technically limited. Like I'm so bad at making graphics and things. We have an awesome producer on CLNS named Ahmed. I'm sure you guys have heard his name if you watch our post-game show, The Garden Report. He makes everything like this, like within 2 seconds. It's kind of crazy and they always come out amazing. Tom is kind of carrying with the questions here. I'm going to keep going through these, Tom, because these are good questions. What differences have you found in covering the Celtics at a team level versus covering the WNBA at a national level? This is a great question. I absolutely love being on a beat. There's nothing I like more than being on a beat. Honestly, I don't think I would ever want to be a national NBA person or a national WNBA person that just talks about a league at large, because my whole thing is that I want to really understand the people that I'm covering. I want to really understand what makes them tick, what kinds of questions benefit them. And when I write a feature about one of those players, I want to know everything about them. And so everything that I've done about the Celtics this year, it's like when I wrote a feature about Pritchard, I've been to 50 Peyton Pritchard press conferences. I've asked him 100 questions. I've watched every minute of basketball that he's played over the last 3 years. Therefore, I feel like super qualified to write this story and to take this one-on-one interview. The challenge with covering the whole league is that you're kind of jumping in and now you're asking a question at a press conference that maybe was asked 2 days earlier, but you weren't at that game. And I hate that feeling because I don't have imposter syndrome because I think that I deserve the opportunities because I do work really hard and I am everywhere. But I get that feeling when I'm coming into a game. Like, for example, when I cover the WNBA, I go to one game at a time. Like next week, I'm most likely going to be at a Liberty game, and that'll be my first Liberty game of the season. And I'm going to ask a question, but it's possible that my question will have already been asked by somebody else. And I kind of hate that feeling of like I'm coming in and I don't actually know exactly what I'm talking about, or like maybe this player that I asked this question has already answered this question like 3 weeks ago and it wasn't really worth asking. So that there's a lot of reasons why I like covering one team versus a league at large. And I wish like if I would love to cover like the Celtics and the Sun and like just have that be my entire prerogative, and just know everything about those players and watch all of their games and all of that. So yeah, that's probably the biggest change for me. Outside of that, like it's kind of a similar job. Like you're looking for interesting stories, you're looking for highlighting players. Like I use a lot of the same principles, kind of going off of that. Question here from Latanya. What do you think outsiders or non-fans don't understand about the Celtics? It's a broad question. I'm trying to think. One of the things that I've been thinking about is this is maybe not exactly what you're asking, but this made me think. I think people are always looking to diagnose a problem. Like you've all seen it, like right after a team gets eliminated, a lot of times there's that story that comes out that's like, here's what really happened. Like everybody hated this guy in the locker room, or like the coach sucked, or nobody trusted their point guard. Like there's always that big bomb that drops after, not always, but a lot of times there is. And I think it's because there's a natural desire among fans to be able to say, here's what went wrong, or here's who the fraud was on our team. And the biggest thing that I have learned is that that's not always true. Sometimes you just lose basketball games. And with this most recent Celtics team, it's easy to say, oh, they were always, they had struggled earlier in the year. The signs were there. They were older, or like, their previous title run, they were just playing bad teams. So it was really like, it was not serious. And I think in reality, like having been to every single practice and shoot around and almost every game of this team over the last year and every press conference and asking a million questions, like I don't think this team was fraudulent. I don't think this team was fatally flawed. I still think they could have won the championship. And a lot of times I think when you're on the outside, it seems like, oh, this team was destined and this team wasn't. And I fall into that as well. But sometimes you just have to get a couple lucky bounces and make a couple big shots. And that's what separates a first round exit from a team that makes the finals. And so I think what I realized, being kind of the closer I get to it, is the more I realize that there's not always a story. There's not always like an explanation or someone to blame. Sometimes stuff just happens. And if it keeps happening year after year, then like maybe this team needs a major change. But being around like this Celtics team, I don't think they were like fundamentally different than the previous one. Like they dealt with some health things. They had a couple worse games, but like they could have won the championship this year and they could have lost in 24 if a couple of things had gone differently. So that's the biggest thing that I don't know that it always gets communicated. And our job is to always give you guys explanations and to tell you like why certain things happen and to have hot takes. And sometimes it's hard right after a game ends to immediately go on the Garden Report and say like, here's everything that I think. And sometimes I'll say stuff and then I go back and watch the game again. And I'm like, I already kind of like don't know that I believe everything I said was completely accurate. But sometimes you have to just accept that there's not always an explanation. And that sometimes basketball is just a crazy, unpredictable sport, and that's just a part of it. Question here from Kampanga. Have you ever been interested in covering other international leagues? Honestly, not really. Like, I have such a narrow focus. I specifically want to cover the Celtics, and I don't want to cover other sports. I don't want to cover other leagues. I think that's why I didn't major in journalism, because I was like, my job prospects are so limited. Like, I literally want to do this exact thing. And so I don't have a very broad range. Like I wouldn't be down to cover like another team or like another league. Like I don't think I'd be interested in that. So probably doesn't help my long-term job odds, but not as much. And I don't really watch a lot of overseas sports. My roommate is a big soccer fan, so I've been watching a little bit of soccer, but I'm not like up to speed with the Euro League as much. And that's why with the draft stuff has been hard for me, because I don't know all the international prospects. I'm like just learning about right now. There's a lot of talk right now. A question from Adam. There's a lot of talk currently about the finals presentation lacking in the past few years. Do you think there's a way forward in letting local broadcasts lead over the national broadcast? It's a great question. I've been pretty bothered by that as well. Like, just the presentation has definitely been lacking. I haven't wanted to complain about it too much online because I don't want to become a part of the problem where it's like now I'm complaining a ton. But I do think that there just needs to be a revamp of like the attention to detail, and like the trophy on the floor is like one thing, but it's the sound effects, it's the music. Like, we all grew up on it. We all know the difference in presentation. And I think, I don't know if it's a cost cutting thing or if it's just an ESPN thing, but I do think that next year, because there's going to be more media, more providers for the NBA, Amazon, and NBC getting involved, it's going to force everybody to be better because there's going to be more competition. And they're going to come in with new ideas. I've already seen, I can't remember if this is NBC or Amazon, but one of them is going to have show starting lineups on air. Like, you guys should see that. Like, I love watching the starting lineups in person. It's part of the hype. You can hear the crowd. You can get the body language. Like, why is that not on television? So I think there's a lot of ways where presentation can improve. Is the local broadcast a part of that? I think maybe a little. I do think it's kind of weird that like a team makes the finals and the people that have been calling those games all year have no role anymore. Like, it'd be nice to see Drew and Scal and Abby have a part in the production for the national broadcast, because after all, they know this team better than anybody. So I don't know if there's a solution, but I do think that there needs to be a better presentation, a better production moving forward, because I've loved the games. I think these playoffs have been awesome. You can't really not think that, because the Pacers have been just hitting game winner after game winner, and it's just been like legendary. But I will say, like, the first couple of games, the presentation was lacking, and I totally agree with people that have critiqued that. Some of these questions are tough. Joshua asks, what's something you have covered either in a story, video, or interview that you wish had garnered more national/widespread attention? I don't know. I honestly feel usually when I've written something I've been excited about, I feel like you guys read it, and that's really what I care about. I don't know that I care that much about whether it has national attention. I wrote a story about Joe Mazzulla and how he mentored Natalie Nakase, who is the Golden State Valkyries head coach, who's actually crushing it right now. And the Valkyries have been an awesome team, probably my favorite team to watch. If you follow the WNBA, this is the newest expansion team, and they've won like half their games. They've been great defensively, despite having a roster on paper that I did not expect to compete. But anyways, I saw Natalie Nakase at practice for a brief second, and I was like, I know who she is. I don't know that the other reporters are going to know because they don't cover the WNBA, and she hadn't even coached a game yet. And I basically tracked her down, interviewed her, tracked Joe Mazzulla down, got him on the side in practice, which was very hard to get. So worked really hard on that story, loved that story. I think a lot of Celtics fans read it, but I kind of wish that more people across the league and across the WNBA had read it, because I think that it was an interesting story about just mentorship among coaches and Joe's willingness to have Natalie Nakase go behind the scenes with him for weeks and spend time with the coaching staff and pick his brain. And like, he didn't have to do that, but he had a mutual friend in her with Sam Cassell, because she had worked with Sam Cassell in the Clippers. And he was like, I want to give back to first-time coaches. And I love that story. It's one of my favorite stories that I've written. And I think it was read by Celtics fans. It got pretty good views, but I wish that it had been read more by WNBA fans. Like, I want every Valkyries fan to read it, because I think it's interesting, kind of that behind-the-scenes thing. Mike here asks, is there a distinct difference between media and the W versus the NBA? It seems like W media is a little more close-knit, more willing to help. I don't know. Because there's no WNBA team in my city, I don't have the ability to like really form like really close relationships with WNBA reporters as much. Like, I know the Connecticut Sun reporters, they're awesome. I know the Liberty reporters, they're awesome. But with the Celtics reporters, like, I'm around them every single day. They're some of my best friends. I spend literally weeks with them because there's a team in my city and I do it all. I'm at everything. So it's hard to compare the two. I think with the NBA, with the Celtics media, like, I've made some really, really good friends. And so I think there's a lot of people that are willing to help you and willing to lend a hand. Like, when I started, I reached out to a lot of people when I first got the job, and I was like, I want to reach out to all my favorite reporters, and almost everybody took time to chat with me. So I have felt that people are really helpful. Bobby was one of the first people to chat with me. Jack, both of those guys, it's funny because they're both good friends of mine now, but like, they did like online calls with me on like Google Meets to like explain how the industry worked. So I felt a welcomeness like in both spaces. Marty asks, are you sick of the rumor mill surrounding the team right now? Seems like a lot of smoke and mirrors. The number one thing that I'm sick of is not the rumors. It's just the fact that, like, so we pretty much know right now, like, we all can agree on this, that most of the Celtics players are potentially could be traded. Like, it wouldn't be a complete shock if anybody was traded, with the exception of like Tatum. And so there is an understanding that, like, it's going to require a really good offer, right? You're not going to trade Jaylen Brown for something that's not a spectacular offer because he's a spectacular player. You're not going to trade Derek White for not a great offer because he's a great player. I think we all can agree that the Celtics are probably more willing to part ways with a player like Kristaps Porzingis or Drew Holiday than a Jaylen Brown or Derek White. So we already know all these things. I think they've been reported by multiple sources time and again. And so the only thing that I find frustrating is that if one of the big national reporters goes on TV and says the same thing that I just said at any given day, that sets the agenda for that day. Now we all have to respond to it. It gets aggregated by NBA Central, Legion Hoops. We all have to tweet about it. We all have to, if you're a reporter that writes like short form stories, you have to aggregate it. And like, it just sets the agenda for that day. Like, I was during the playoffs, I forget who it was, if it was Shams or somebody else, but they said, the Celtics are going to have to lose a key piece this offseason to get below the second apron. And we all knew that. But because he says it now and he has this massive following, now it's creating like a media frenzy around that. And so it's not Shams' fault. It's not the national reporter's fault that we treat everything they say like the gospel. But it is kind of frustrating sometimes when I'm like, this doesn't need to be like a 48-hour news cycle over like this random comment that's actually not breaking news. They have every right to say it because that's their job and they're well sourced and they don't say things that aren't true. Like, these guys are very careful about their sources and making sure they don't upset anybody and that they're, accurate in their reporting. But sometimes I'm like, I can't believe that we turned this into a media frenzy over something that's not actually new. And so that's what I get frustrated by, is when I see like report, like, the Celtics could potentially eventually trade Jaylen Brown if they got an insane offer, like a Derek White. Like, this, it's not new, right? And so they have every right to report that. I just wish I see the way that it like sends this ripple effect across fans, like it's new information. And that's the only thing that I sometimes find like, this does not need to be a thing. But again, it's nobody's fault. It's kind of part of this whole thing. So, Achui asks, is there anyone to watch for Maine this year? I don't know who's going to be on the Maine roster, but I will be watching those games. I love watching the Maine Celtics. Someone asked, I wouldn't pull a Joe Sway. I assume he got a good pay upgrade to move. I don't know if he got, I don't know about Joe Sway's professional situation, whether it was better or whatnot, but for me, I feel very attached to the city of Boston and growing up here and my family and everything and my friends. And so for me, like, it's really important to cover this team. And honestly, like, I don't want to make any promises, but like, I would actually, I would be stunned if I went elsewhere. This is not a reporting question, but because this is breaking news from today, I will answer it. Mike asked, apologies if this has been covered, but specific question about JB surgery. Do we know if he had the meniscus repair or the shave/snip that Robert Williams had? He didn't have the repair. I don't think he needed the repair. He had the snip or whatever, the very minor knee procedure. He's only going to miss a few weeks. He'll be ready for training camp. So that's how we know. There haven't been a lot of details disclosed. But I caution about calling it the Robert Williams because that really concerns people. That it's going to be this like very treacherous, dark path for him. Jaylen doesn't have like a knee condition. He hasn't had a long history of knee problems. Like, I don't want to promise, like, obviously he could have knee problems moving forward, but there's no reason to think right now that his knee thing is like anywhere in that trajectory. I've seen the Rob Williams comparison a lot. I know that's not what you mean, but I just wanted to point that out as well. Jay asks, are you looking forward to Summer League? What should we expect to see from Summer League? I'm so excited for Summer League because at the end of the day, I love covering basketball and I've really missed being at games on a daily basis. And so I look forward to being around basketball all day, every day. I look forward to watching Celtics games. I look forward to watching a lot of the other prospects in person because you can go to all the games. They're all in the same two arenas. So all day I spend watching games, and a lot of them I don't have any implications for my job because I can just watch Cooper Flag play and just enjoy it and talk to people and talk to scouts and general managers. And I met a lot of great people and a lot of great sources at Summer League last year. Like, that was probably one of the most productive things that I've done. Who will be on the Summer League roster? I don't know. Baylor Scheinman should be there. He told us that on the Garden Report last week. I would imagine the younger players, whoever's back, there might be some trades, but like I would imagine Jordan Wall should be on the summer league team. Whoever they draft with the 28 and 32 picks, which I don't know who that'll be, or if they trade up or trade down, like those guys will be. And then probably some players that will just be on summer league spots. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to watching some basketball. I'm looking forward to getting to know people in the NBA world. I'm trying to get to know more people from other teams so that my sources extend beyond just the Celtics. And it's hard because obviously I'm around the Celtics way more. But it's a lot of fun, and I look forward to just kind of being around the sport and around the action. And there will probably be some moves by then, so it'll be nice to be able to talk to people in person and not just cover those moves from home. Okay. I'm going to wrap in a minute here. Who are your favorite non-Celtics to watch, or a team you like to see come to town? Steph Curry is probably number one for me. I'm a 3-point shooter. I loved watching Steph Curry play growing up. He's probably like the one time I was starstruck was when I watched him warm up, and I was like, I can't believe that's Steph Curry. But then even when I asked him a question, I felt like I was a normal person. So teams that I like to see come to town, like usually just the good teams, like when there's rivalries, when there's stars, like that's fun. It's always disappointing when like there's a team coming to town and then the stars are injured. That happened a lot of times last year. So I don't know that there's like one specific team, but like all the all-time greats, I'm very grateful when I get a chance to see LeBron play or Kevin Durant, because it's like I feel like, that you don't know how many years they're going to have left, and the chance to be able to watch them in person is pretty awesome. And to be able to ask questions and all of that. So yeah. Ben asks a great question. What is internal conversation like among journalists regarding AI and its potential impact on sports journalism? There are already a lot of sites that I can see are shifting towards AI. Yahoo Sports replaced some workers with AI. This is something that the union that I'm a part of, Vox Media Union, is currently dealing with in negotiations. I'm not sure how much I can say publicly, so I'll err on the side of not saying more. But it's a hot button issue for sure for unions, for reporters, because I think AI is going to threaten a lot of jobs, and journalism is definitely one of them. My personal approach has been, I want to be as AI proof as a reporter as possible. So could AI host this live stream? Probably not. Right? This is a good example of something that can't be replaced by AI. Could AI go pursue a story and sit down with a player for 20 minutes? No. But could AI aggregate an injury update? Yes. And so I do aggregate injury updates, like that's part of the job, but most of my work could not be aggregated and could not be replaced by AI. And that's like one of my guiding principles as a reporter. I try really hard to make sure that whatever it is that I'm doing as a reporter could not be replaced by robots, because that's a pretty good principle in general. And then also it has practical implications. But I think that there's been a ton of discussions over the past few weeks, in particular, the people that I work with around this. And I think that it's something that's going to continue to be a massively kind of important issue moving forward. Okay, I am going to continue scrolling here. Okay. I might have gotten all the questions. Appreciate the super chat, Jay. This has been fun. I honestly enjoyed doing this show. This was kind of a mosh posh of questions. The one other thing I'll say, this was on my agenda here, discerning between reporting and reporting in quotations. Something to be on the lookout for is that a lot of times, people will have a trade idea, like Bleacher Report will come up with a mock trade. And it's like that reporter's right to make up a trade. They're playing in the trade machine. They say you could trade these guys for these guys. And then people will aggregate that or react being like, new Bleacher Report trade shows XYZ. But it's like that trade is literally just made up. It might not even be like allowed based on financial rules. So just be mindful when you're reading about trades. Usually you're reading about just made up trades that are not reports. Once in a while, you might have an NBA insider actually report this team is interested in this player, and that's completely different. So that's just like one thing to be on the lookout for is, are you looking at a trade idea or are you looking at a report? Those are two different things. And 99% of the time, it's just a completely made up trade. Like you could sit at home and make up a trade too. You could make a graphic. You could put Derek White in a Hornets jersey and say that's a trade that we could consider. But it doesn't necessarily mean anything. It could just be completely made up. So that's something to just be mindful of. And just last question, favorite regular season game from last season. I can't remember the game, but Tatum had a game winner. Was it the Raptors? The game winner in person at TD Garden was a lot of fun. I think it was the Raptors. Those feel like a million years ago, but those are always so fun to watch game winners because it's like now there's this moment, the crowd goes crazy, and then your story is going to be about that moment, and that's way more interesting than just like they won by 12 against some team today. So yeah. Before I wrap, just want to say thank you all for all the questions. Great questions. If you're listening to this later on, you can put questions in the chat on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple. I'll answer those. Please, as always, subscribe, like this live stream. It really helps with the algorithm. Again, I don't want to do clickbait, so you got to help me make sure people see this stuff. So like, subscribe. I have my podcast channel, You Got Boston Podcast. If you're watching this on CLNS, make sure you're subscribed to that. All my episodes are there. I have 2 draft episodes that came out this week. I brought on Tyler Rucker of No Ceilings NBA and Kevin O'Connor of Yahoo Sports. They watch draft stuff all year, so they actually have informed opinions. So rather than tell you guys who I think they should draft, I brought on people that know this more than I do, and they kind of shared their viewpoints. And then, as always, check out all of our content at CLNS Media. We have so much podcasting right now. There's so much analysis, news. Bobby Manning and John Zanis went live earlier today to react to the Jaylen Brown injury news. Tonight, after Game 3, you can watch the entire post-game show that I'll be on as well. We'll be reacting to Game 3 and talking more about all this stuff. And then if you missed last week, we had Baylor Shireman on for 45 minutes. He was such a good sport. He answered so many questions. We were asking him the silliest questions, like best football player on the team, best golfer, like who would you room with, who wouldn't you room with? And he was just like a great sport about it. It's very rare that you get to actually watch players answer questions like not with a PR media training, like rigidity to them. And Baylor just had his guard down. He was like sitting in his car, joking around with us. And for 45 minutes, like that is like kind of unheard of. So watch that episode. I saw it had like a decent amount of views, but I'm like, I think every Celtics fan needs to watch that episode because it just gives you a perspective on how Baylor Shireman is. And I think he'll be a key part of this team for years to come. So yeah, enjoy that episode. Enjoy all the content on CLNS. Subscribe with CLNS Media, CLNS All Access. If you're curious about the Jaylen Brown event this past weekend, our photographer, Richie LeMay, took so many photos and videos of that event. It was raining. It was awesome. It was one of my favorite events that I've been to. We have a video on CLNS All Access showing that as well. So check out the channel. As always, thank you for the support on You Got Boston podcast. You can find my coverage on CelticsBlog.com. And if you have other questions, message me. If there's things you're like, is this rumor legit? Is this not? Just message me on Twitter. I just don't want to do the whole putting people on blast thing. So as long as we keep it in the DMs, I'm happy to be helpful. Enjoy the rest of your night. Enjoy Game 3 of the finals. I'm looking forward to watching this one.